Regardless of what your feelings are regarding The Last Jedi, the return of J.J. Abrams to the director's chair was enough to get many people excited about the conclusion of the Skywalker saga. Unfortunately, The Rise of Skywalker might actually be the worst film in the entire saga.
Did you rub my lamp?
1,000 generations living here now.
Here we go.
Hey, what's going on everyone, and welcome to FilmSpeak, where film is our second language. I'm Griffin, as always, and if film is your second language, consider hitting that subscribe button for more insightful and articulate film discourse and analysis. All right, so I'm just going to get right into this thing. I think there's a lot to discuss regarding The Rise of Skywalker. If you're watching this video, you know who it's directed by, you know who's in this film, and plot details have been kind of kept under wraps, so I'm gonna try and keep things as vague as possible. So I was fortunate enough to attend the world premiere of The Rise of Skywalker, which was honestly kind of a dream because I've been a Star Wars fan since I've been a little kid. The first film I ever saw was The Phantom Menace, or maybe the first Star Wars film I ever saw was The Phantom Menace, and so it's always been kind of a dream of mine to go to a premiere for a Star Wars film, and to go to the premiere for the conclusion of the Skywalker saga was very special to me, and so that whole experience was something that I'll definitely cherish forever. Unfortunately, the movie that I saw wasn't great, and I've seen the film twice now, and I have to say, I think it's the first time I've walked out of a Star Wars movie and felt nothing both times. In fact, I'll say upon rewatch, I walked out of it disliking it even more than I did initially. I think it's a movie that a lot of fans will enjoy. There's a lot of fan servicey moments in there, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. I think there is a good way and bad way to do fan service, and this film has a mixture of both, leaning a little bit more into the negative side of fan service, so much so that I go as far as to call this film the rise of nostalgia. But ultimately, I think The Rise of Skywalker is far more concerned with fixing plot and answering questions that everyone has, more so than it is with progressing our characters and completing their arcs as people in a way that feels natural and earned. Right off the bat, with what I would probably consider to be the worst opening crawl ever put in front of a Star Wars movie, it just feels like a complete retcon of The Last Jedi. And I'm sure many of you will like that. Even me, as someone who doesn't like The Last Jedi, just found it to be such a lazy workaround. It just feels like a massive plot convenience that the Emperor was plucked out of thin air and just plopped into this movie for the sake of having another big bad. He never really felt like he should be in this film, and a lot of what you read in that opening crawl feels like this film is the sequel to a different movie that isn't The Last Jedi. In fact, within the first 5 minutes, really, every major question that you really wanted answered in the previous films is answered in a very convenient way here. But even still, this film relies so much on plot conveniences and random bits of Star Wars mythology that are just jam-packed into this one movie. This film is frankly overstuffed. It really feels like JJ is trying to make up for lost time that he didn't get in a sequel to The Force Awakens, and so in doing, this movie almost feels like two movies jam-packed into one. There are so many extraneous plot threads going on here, and it feels like he's trying to make a sequel to his movie along with concluding the franchise, and it just never flows in a way that feels right. This truthfully almost feels like a random one-off fan fiction conclusion to this saga. It doesn't feel like the natural way that this story should have progressed, and as a result, everything comes off very forced and cheesy and quite frankly lame. Ultimately, the trajectory of this sequel trilogy is just very awkward. It never felt like they had an entire story mapped out. They had really no idea where they wanted to go with it. And so by the time we get to The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson does his own thing. You either like it or you hate it. But then JJ kind of comes in here and just makes up this random sort of thing. They just says, oh, the Emperor's back. In fact, I'm pretty sure Poe Dameron has a line in the film that just says, oh, the Emperor's back.
What are you doing there?
And so we're just supposed to buy into these really lazy plot conveniences in order for the story to progress, and I never was able to get on board with what they were doing. On top of that, this movie just hits the ground running, and I mean sprinting. There's rarely a moment to breathe throughout the course of this film, which is good and bad. I think it makes the 2 hour and 20-some minute runtime more palatable, but it also affects the pacing majorly. This movie is jumping around all over the place, especially in the beginning, and it never truly settles in. It starts with Kylo, then it goes to Rey, then it goes to Finn and Poe, and then it goes back to Rey, and then it goes to Kylo, and it's jumping all over the place, and we don't get a second to really marinate with these characters, to spend time with them, to get a real sense of where they're at this point in time. It really feels like we're just jumping into the middle of a movie that had already begun, and I'm not talking about a third part to a 3-part story. I'm saying if this thing was a movie, where we enter when this film begins, it feels very much like halfway through the film. It's just very weird the way this thing kicks off. I do like the energy that JJ brings to these projects. I think this definitely has JJ Abrams' stamp all over it. He brings a lot of kinetic camera movements and exciting set pieces, but I didn't get enough of that in this film to really wow me, which leads me to the next part of The Rise of Skywalker that I didn't like, and it was the fact that this film didn't have that big moment of just wow, that epic moment that made me go, fuck yeah, I love Star Wars. It was devoid of all of that. Many of the revelations felt forced and pandering. The climactic action set piece is colossally underwhelming. This is the big climactic action note your series is gonna go out on? Really? There are side characters such as Kerry Russell and Naomi Aki who are introduced who just feel like glorified cameos, and their connections to the core group feels pointless, like it should have been introduced in the previous film. Even Lando Calrissian, Billy D. Williams returning, I should have felt his impact more than what we got. He is also basically a glorified cameo and a plot convenience who just happens to show up whenever our main heroes need answers. Now, with all that being said, there are a few things I did enjoy about The Rise of Skywalker. When Rey, Finn, and Poe all get together, there's a lot of great banter that goes back and forth, and I really bought into the group dynamic. In fact, it was something that I wish we had gotten a little bit more of in the previous films, seeing these three together, seeing them interact and go on this adventure together, which I guess leads me to my next thing that I enjoyed. This movie definitely borrows from quest films in the vein of The Last Crusade, and when it's doing that and it's these characters going on this really universe-trotting adventure, I find it to be quite enjoyable, and I wish that through this adventure, the characters had learned a little bit more and had developed as people a little bit more. But that being said, it is enjoyable to watch, especially just for the banter, especially between Finn and Poe. Finn and Poe truly steal the movie for me. They are the massive standouts. Their bromance is even better than it has been before. You really feel like these are two guys who have connected, who have bonded, and have a respect for one another. There are great one-liners that are shot back and forth. They're energetic, they're entertaining, and Oscar Isaac and John Boyega are having the most fun, I think, when they're on screen together. Now, unfortunately, due to the untimely death of Carrie Fisher, J.J. Abrams was forced to use unused footage to shape a performance for Leia, and as impressive as it was that they really had this much readily available footage, the integration of it felt awkward. It felt like the actors were talking to a character in a video game who could only give one-word responses. And when the heart of your film relies on this character and her very being and her having to impart wisdom on some of our main characters, it makes it really difficult for that impact to be felt. And it's such a tough situation because I liked what they did with Leia and how important she was to this story. I just don't think they were realistically able to do what they wanted to do, and they were just hindered by Carrie Fisher's untimely death. While The Return of the Emperor feels incredibly shoehorned in there, like JJ didn't know what to do for a villain, I did like some of the lore that came with him. I thought he mined some of the more interesting aspects of Sith mythology in order to texturize Palpatine a little bit more, but nevertheless, he just ultimately came down to a one-note, cackling villain, and it really just begged the question as to why bring him back in the first place. It pains me to say it, but the score by John Williams is so incredibly underwhelming. There were missed opportunities to use cues here, there were missed opportunities to really play into the epic nature of certain moments, and I think out of the entire sequel trilogy, this score is by far the weakest of the three. Before I give you my final verdict, guys, on Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, why don't you take a second here and like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel for more insightful and articulate discourse on Star Wars movies and stuff. Man, I really can't think. This movie's really bumming me out. Oh man. Ultimately, The Rise of Skywalker is a movie that's trying to jam-pack so many things into one movie. And it's the product of a series of films that don't entirely fit together. Each one actively dislikes the last. And as a result, we're left with this very bizarre Frankenstein stitched together series of movies. I get it. I like fan service. Hell, Rogue One is my favorite Star Wars movie, but I think there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. I look at a film like Avengers Endgame and I say, yep, that was the right way to do it. Everything there felt earned and it felt like it serviced the characters in the story as opposed to just giving people these little bits of nostalgia. Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is the exact opposite. It's just giving people these little bits of nostalgia for the sake of pleasing them, almost as an apology for the previous movie. But ultimately, I think when we look at this sequel trilogy as a whole, we're going to be looking at a series of movies that feel like they have no direction, that really could have been fixed by having a plan put in place. And when it comes down to it, I think the sequel trilogy comes off more as fan fiction than it does an actual continuation of the Skywalker saga. To me, the series ends at 6, and this stuff is just whatever you want to make do with it. And it's very disappointing to say that, but it's honest to God how I feel. And so, for all of these reasons and the reasons I've mentioned throughout my review, I'm ultimately going to be giving Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker a 4.5 out of 10. And now I want to hear from you all. I want to know what your favorite film under the Disney Lucasfilm tenure has been down in the comments section below. I'm talking the spin-offs, I'm talking the sequel trilogy. I want to hear about it down there. And if you've seen The Rise of Skywalker, guys, be sure to let me know your thoughts and opinions on that film as well. As always, guys, you can like FilmSpeak on Facebook and follow us on Twitter simply by searching FilmSpeak. And if you like me specifically and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me through this. I know it's been a bit of a long one. I have so much to say regarding this. I might have to dive into some spoilers. It's really hard to talk about a lot of these elements without giving stuff away. I tried my best. Hopefully you were all able to enjoy this review, but I'll catch you next time. Take care.